I've learned, and understanding what it is you're trying to achieve. Because if you're trying to achieve growth, the things you do daily, the decisions you make will be more divergent from a company that's looking for profitability.
Hi, my name is Courtney, and welcome to How They Scaled It, where scaling is done with both sides of the brain. On this show, we sit down with growth stage businesses and speak with founders and industry leaders in e-commerce and SaaS sectors. We showcase their journeys, unpacking the pivotal moments, marketing strategies, and key decisions that shaped their success. Today, I'm bringing on Kunle Campbell. Kunle is an e-commerce thought leader and co-founder of Octillion, a digital-first brand house specializing in health-conscious consumer goods based in Oxford, UK. He's also the host of the 2X e-commerce podcast. Kunle's experience has taken him to the stages of the SAP Commerce and Barclays, and his work has been featured in places like the BBC and New York Times. He's also just released a book, E-commerce Growth Strategy, packed with actionable advice and for brands looking to grow and build a community. Kunle, welcome to How They Scaled It.
Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome. Well, I want to start out by talking about kind of where this all started. I know that you recently started Octillion. You guys are a couple years old now. What inspired you to start Octillion, and kind of like what led you to starting Octillion?
It's a very good question. So most of my career has been so I started out in my journey in mid 2005. I was in university at the time, and I think the very course I remember that was a light bulb moment for me had to do with digital marketing. I was able to, it was by a professor called, actually it's a doctor called Dr. Dave Chaffee, and he came in as a guest speaker, and he started to ask us questions, a very interactive lesson at the time, and some of the answers required data and others creativity. And prior to that, every other thing I'd done was more related to just data.
Yeah.
But I had this creative spark in me that was never ignited. So just getting into this world was that opportunity to say, okay, where's that spark? And that segued me into a very specialist bit of e-commerce, which was search. At the time, if you wanted to make anything from the internet, Google was the gateway. Right, so you just needed to have a huge presence on Google. Most people were starting their journeys on the internet with our phones, on their desktops, on Google. And I became very good at getting companies exposure on Google, like really, really good. And most of the techniques I used were ethical. I wouldn't say everything was ethical at the time. It depends on how you define ethics, right? Based on Google's rules. But most of the time, I sort of leaned more to the white, more grey hat aspects of things, and that led me to running a local agency in Oxfordshire eventually. So when I left that role, departed that role. So basically from university, I got a role in a international property company that required clients from all over the world. So it was an opportunity for me to again essentially show my skills. Just show my skills. So built a small team in that company, and when the 2008 financial crisis came crashing, most of their clients were bankers and investors, and so the company had to shrink. It didn't go out of business, but I just fell on my sword. I just said, you know what, most of my team members will be departing. Would you guys still like to work with me, on a consultancy basis? And they're like, yes, for sure. So in 2009, I had this agency, and they were my first client. And by 2010-11, I started to get exposed to e-commerce. And I started to get e-commerce clients, and they were more national. So rather than local, they were more national clients. And I started to like it because, like, if you have like a lead gen campaign on the one hand, you generate leads for a business. I used to generate leads for like lots of like financial businesses. The leads are only as good as the salesperson who's going to close those leads, right? The sales system. So if anything falters in that system, everybody sort of bears the grunt. So off the back of that, I decided to like e-commerce because I could see a full funnel. I could create funnels in Google Analytics. At the time, it was just Google Analytics. You could create the funnel and you could see where there are drop-offs. I started to learn about conversion rate optimization. I was like, landing pages. In fact, you still needed landing pages for the lead generation anyway. So you're learning the science, you're learning about copywriting. And in 2013, I just decided to double down on e-commerce. I just loved all my e-commerce clients. And then I created an e-commerce agency. At the time, it was called 2X e-commerce or 2X media, excuse me. And again, it was very focused on search. And we're giving clients terrific results. And there was this one client that challenged us. They were selling more like appliances online. They were more like photography accessories, from anything from batteries to SD cards and everything. And look, we got them the results they were looking for a large part, but we realized that even though we doubled their revenue on the one hand, doubled their traffic on the one hand, revenue didn't sort of jump up as much as the traffic. So I started to figure out, okay, there are more aspects to e-com than I thought. I always think it was a traffic game, and then I proceeded. I was like, okay, there's a lot more to learn, and I eventually started to work when the podcast was doing well at the time. I just set up the podcast to learn more about SEO, about e-commerce, not just SEO but e-commerce, and I got an e-commerce manager role, like an interim e-commerce manager role. And then I started to realize, okay, there are many aspects. I started to learn about like meta advertising. I met a lot of people. So my scope became a lot broader from a more marketing manager, marketing director role. So I took a couple of roles off the back of that. And yeah, things were going well. We used to speak, I got hired by Meta to speak for 3 years, I think. They had this at the time they were called Facebook. They had this accelerator program for local news operators across the world, and they were trying to essentially help them with their digital transformation. So moving them from traditional subscriptions to more digital subscriptions. And as you know, one element in a subscription flow is the checkout process, right? Yeah. So I became a really, really good checkout expert for like media, in media space, in the sense that I'd understudied like checkouts at work. We worked with a number of local news operators, and essentially bringing them up to speed from that perspective, from a CRO perspective. Had numerous like thought leadership roles. I was invited to speak across the world. We was in most continents, as facilitating in their workshops, and I just got to a point in time. I was like, look, and then I was also consulting for like as an e-commerce director for a number of like more like it's more fractional e-commerce director, e-commerce manager, for a number of $10 million revenue businesses, that sort of end. And I thought, okay, I want a piece of the cake. I want to get to the other side. I want to understand what it really means. It's just this thing of curiosity, right? I've always been very curious. And my mind was just like, okay, what does it take? How do you do this properly? And I realized that, okay, I'll need to get certified in like private equity. And I thought, oh no. I did the research and I was like, wow, okay, this is a lot. This would be a leap. Am I ready for it? And I recall somebody talking about, moving further with partners, with business partners. So I was just active, like just having an active eye. And lo and behold, I was writing my book, and I was just trying to give a synopsis of my book. And there was a chapter in my book where I was just trying to give a background as to the university I went and all of that stuff. And then I just did a search, trying to, because I had applied for 3 universities, and 2 of the lower tier universities two of the universities that rejected me, and then 1 university accepted me. And then I just was trying to search for the name of the university, and I put the name of the course and everything, and then I stumbled on my partner's dissertation. And his dissertation was around using the search fund model. For those who don't know what a search fund model is, it's more a buy and build one company. So you go into the market, look for probably a baby boomer business. They're looking to retire. You buy it from them. You modernize it, operate. You raise capital. Based on the valuation, and then you operate this one business, and you eventually sell it on. So it's a buy and operate model for a single business search fund. Well, his theory or his methodology was somewhat different. It was like, look, we could do the same thing in e-commerce. But he was not an e-commerce guy. He was an outsider. So I got out of my comfort zone, got his contact details, and reached out to him. And after about 3 conversations, we're like, let's test the waters. And we tested the waters for about maybe 6 months or thereabouts. We worked on a small project together. We saw we could, we were making a lot of progress. And then I joined Octillion, because at the time he'd set up Octillion for that purpose. So he had finished his he'd finished his course at University of London, and so I then joined the boat essentially, and that is how that's the story of how I go into what I do.
Yeah, amazing. And it's incredible because you really have had a lot of experience within the e-commerce space, but really in like the marketing space by starting with lead gen on Google when it was kind of the Wild West. Not a lot of regulations, pretty easy to get around things. And then that was probably the same for when you were getting started with Meta, where it was, you could do a lot of stuff on Meta back in the day. But I love that you continuously were digging in a little bit deeper, specifically around e-commerce. And one thing that we struggle with as an agency is like control. And so I think that you the way that you got over that is you're like, well, what if I just like buy the company, or if I, get into VC or private equity, and then I can guide people a lot more effectively because I have the funding to support them. And then you found, it's amazing that you found a business partner through a Google search. That's kind of a very full circle moment for you.
That's true.
So now that you've been with Octillion for a few years, what have been like the biggest challenges in that space? Because it is a fairly new space for you then.
It is. The challenge is, you realize that operators carry, a lot. Obviously with the risk, there's rewards, right? So, but it's not siloed. So even with my understanding of e-commerce, the next layer, which I explained in my book, is more an operator. An operator is because with an operator, you it's a balancing act of operational efficiency, like operations, like the operations of your business, like your inventory levels, forecasting, customer service, those aspects. If you have a warehouse, just warehouse management, all that goes with it, staff, and then marketing. So what we did was like, what are our strengths? So I leaned more into the operations and finance, and I leaned more into the marketing. But that being said, we speak each other's language, very important. So I have, over the last 2 years or 3 years, 3 years actually, so my financial literacy has accelerated. So I can't make a decision without understanding its P&L impact. it's just not. It was back in the days. I'll just speak to the other. Why don't we do this or do
Yes.
that, and not really understand the impact? That there's an impact, right? There's a cost reaction. So those are one of the things that I've learned, and understanding what it is you're trying to achieve. Because if you're trying to achieve growth, the things you do daily, the decisions you make will be more divergent from a company that's looking for profitability, just maintaining profitability. So understanding those nuances also has been very, very, very important. Another challenge really has been just concentration, right? So if you acquire brands that are, small, on the small side of things, I'm saying most brands that are below 25, million in revenue, most, not all, do not have like a solid sort of management, team in place. So just professionalizing that, at the same time having to bear with the funds to support that is a challenge. So what we're trying to do is just think bigger, think bigger, and that in of itself would challenge how we think about ourselves and how we also support the teams we will be working with.
Yeah. You said something really interesting about understanding your financials and then making a decision about whether you want to just maintain, so maintenance, keep your profitability the same, or if you're looking to grow. And I think that one thing that I run into a lot with founders and CEOs and leaders is that when they're in growth mode, they're just making big decisions constantly and they're not thinking through the financial impact because you got to spend money to make money. But it sounds like what your approach is to really understand your P&L, and then in the decisions that you're making, you understand that you're reducing your profitability for a short period of time, but you kind of have like a game plan for like how are you able to make that balance or make those decisions, whether making a decision where you're losing profitability is worth the growth. Like what tells you that it's worth that in the short run?
Subscriptions.
Yeah, okay.
So we're in the consumer goods space, and we're replenishable. So it's not like we're selling Gucci bags where you buy it once and then you're thinking, oh my God, there's not much in my account. I need to rethink my life unless you can afford it. But like, if you're selling protein powders, just hypothetically speaking, selling bone broth powder, for instance, it's going to it's going to need a top up, in 30, 45, 60 days. So my goal, if we're in growth mode, is I'm confident I stand behind my product. Number one, the taste is great. We need more people testing. We need to get more people in. And what is the cost of that? And we look at how long people tend to stay with us, and then decide how much we're willing to pay for them up front. But once we understand that, okay, we have a good product, that's number one. Look, it's growth. It's like we got into a company, and the subscriptions were 1,000, and we pushed it to close to 3,000 in 9 months. So it's that sort of thing. As in, like, once once everybody's aligned, that okay, we're looking for subscriptions. You're sitting now with the PPC team, and you're essentially telling them that we're not doing anything sexy, like above the line, branded, like on brand billboards and all of that stuff. Right. Most of it is digital at the level we're playing. But obviously at the next level, it's like, do we buy this billboard or not? That's a big decision. Do we sponsor these buses? If you're in London, or do we do some subway advertising? That's another sort of level. You're probably at the 50, 100 million mark or approaching that, and you have a different set of decisions to make. But again, if I'm making a decision of that magnitude for the first time, I would need to lean on an expert that's done it at least 50 times,
Yeah. Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
and then
Yeah,
learn and then learn and learn and learn, it's just, so humility also is very important, in the game. Just, yeah, I always try to think that, am I over, when you're like in a room with clever people and you're now sort of doing intellectual jiu-jitsu,
Yeah.
then you're in the wrong room, because you really want to listen.
Yes.
You really want to listen. It's like you just want to listen. So that's a challenge, actually, because as a consultant, you're trying to prove your worth all the time and get people to take the suggestions you're making. But as an operator, you need to listen a lot more.
Yeah. One of the things I tell the founders that I work with a lot is, so if they were making protein powder, I say, like, you are so good at making protein powder, you should not also be good at marketing. Marketing is a whole other thing. You shouldn't know all of this stuff. Like, you can have opinions about it and you can have ideas about how you want your brand to be presented, but ultimately it's not your responsibility to understand how Facebook ads works. That's like so hard. People train for this, like they make careers out of it. So I think understanding like where your strengths are, what your role is, and when to listen and when to share it's a really fine line that a lot of founders the most successful founders tend to listen a lot more, I would say. And like, they're smart about it. You're not going to just believe everything you hear, but you're right. Like, you want to go into a room and be able to like listen to experts and get all the information and process it before you make your decisions.
It's a good point. You're right. Yeah, I can't add to that. You're spot on.
Yeah. So when you're scaling these brands, is there any point where you're feeling like you've consistently gotten to like a certain point where you've decided that you need to pivot or change or abandon the project completely? Has that ever kind of come up for you?
All the time.
Yeah.
All the time. There are two ways of looking at this: as a brand, scaling a brand, and there's scaling a product, scaling a product line. There's, can we pause this for a little bit, please?
Of course.
Okay. I just need to answer the door. 1 second, please.
Oh yeah, of course.
Okay, thank you. Connie, I apologize. It had to do with coffee and yeah.
Very important. No worries. Okay, so where were we? What was the last thing we were saying here? Oh, how have you made pivots and stuff as you realized things weren't working, and how did you come to those decisions?
Yeah, so with from my I'll speak to my personal experience. There's scaling a brand, right? And then there's scaling a product line. Excuse me, please. Let me just get my breath.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so from my perspective, there's scaling a brand and then there's scaling a product line. So with scaling a brand, it gets scary because you're looking. I think you should, to scale a brand. This is from my personal experience. We've always taken this approach of where's the lowest hanging fruit. And the lowest hanging fruit has always been a product within a brand, right? So we look at macro trends on the one hand, and we then look at what we have or what we can bring in. Is it a product launch? Is it a product within our portfolio that has the potential to scale based on trends? Can we create demand? So it's when you sort of break the problem down at a product level, it becomes much more manageable. And if you fail, you're failing at a granular product level and you're learning, actually taking those learnings and applying it to another experiment, to another product. And that is how you find success. And if you get a series of successes, they accumulate and help scale the brand further. Excuse me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. I think when we often think about the best way to scale a brand, what we're looking for is someone who has a hero product, and then how can we build on that hero product? And also, is the brand unique enough? Is there a differentiator? Is there something that makes it unique in the current space. And I think that's what you're talking about with, can we create some demand around something different about this compared to its competitors?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you just made a very, very important point on the uniqueness of the brand, the story, how how you turn up, in the marketplace. That's the messaging is very important from a personality, perspective. And one thing we've done, is for every acquisition, there are two things we do. One is obviously process extraction. That is a given, and the second really is we have a brand agency, like the branding agency based out in London, and we sit down with them for a full day. So we give them the brand, everything we know about the brand, and they assess it, for a couple of weeks. And then we have a 1-day workshop where they essentially lay out what is initially, and then they lay out a brand strategy of where we should go. We don't necessarily execute on that immediately, but we know, okay, this is the customer base. This is really who our customers are. This is the potential. These are the macro trends in this space. And this is what we should be saying, and these are things, and this is what the brand didn't necessarily used to say. This is not how they used to turn up. This is how we should actually turn up, moving on from here, and that essentially helps every other person. So whether it's performance search, everybody then has some sort of guidelines which we then give them. So it's important to have that. And you made another very, very good point on the hero product. Yes. For one of the brands we got, because they were essentially contract manufacturers when we acquired them, their hero product actually went out of stock when we acquired the brand, and we had to dig in to make another hero product, and we had to lean in on macro trends. And kind of like understand, okay, this category is taking off. The founder has done, or the ex-founder has done, the founder has done a very good job at least identifying this. How can we take it to its full potential? So sometimes you need to look really inward, and see, okay, what potential do we have, in our portfolio? Have we missed? And then kind of like, really test the waters, and you need a good team to help you test the waters, whether it's the whether it's a design team, copywriting team, performance team. Everybody needs to be in sync to make sure that you tried your hardest in the test, and then when you get the results, you kind of like you crunch it and see, okay, what could we have done right, and where did we win, and and how can we iterate further, regardless of the results.
Yeah, when you it's so impressive that you were able to come up with a new hero product. That would be just putting myself in your shoes. I don't know if I could handle that stress of acquiring a company and then the hero product goes out of stock. So you have to create a new one very quickly, I'm assuming. How much testing did you have to do to find that new hero product?
I'll give you the actual what happened. We acquired the brand, and the top seller was bone broth powder. Like, it was fantastic, as in it's the most natural protein powder you can ever get. And this chap was, they were scaling it, they were scaling it to the moon, as they say. And when we acquired it, there was we sourced from Sweden. There was a crunch, there was a crunch, supply chain crunch. I think the farm that we were sourcing it from was having issues, and they're like, look, so we acquired in, I think it was March, and they're like, look, for the next, so by the stock we had available could only take us till about August, right? So. And there's a shelf life for these things. You can't keep a year's worth of supply for food, right? And we have to be very careful with that, because you're dealing with food. It's going into people's bodies. So we dug inwards. We didn't create a new SKU. What we did was we looked at the entire portfolio, and we're like, okay, there was also coffee in the mix. It's more mycotoxin free coffee, similar to a bulletproof coffee. So everything is clean in this brand, in Caffeine. And we said, okay, mycotoxin coffee, clean coffee. We did some keyword research and all of that stuff. We noticed there was a mushroom coffee in the mix, and we realized, oh, this mushroom coffee isn't really doing what it should be doing, given that mushroom coffee seems to be on the up. And we doubled down on it. So we rebranded it. We changed the packaging. We made sure that we were selling the benefits, the core benefits of it. You know, the 4 adaptogenic mushrooms that were in it. And we doubled down on advertising. So at a product level, we're like, look, we initially like 3x'd advertising with creative, you know, with everything's digital, right? So we almost 3x'd advertising, and then it worked. And then we're looking at the subscriber count. That's a North Star, really, subscriber count. You know, how many people are subscribed? Because once they're hooked, they're hooked. And we just went and became the hero product, right? After like 9 months, it just became the hero product. So sometimes you don't need to. And then we had another experiment. This is another kind of powder, MCT powder. Yes, it worked, but it didn't really work in the sense that, yes, we got subscribers. We needed more money to sort of pour into it. But what we realized is that we needed to educate the market more, which gets more expensive. So with that, you need a TikTok, you know, to really, you need like TikTok campaign, that is, with creators to really educate the market and, you know, get them to understand the benefits, why they should start their morning with this. And so that's a longer game. It is possible. But we thought, okay, do we have the resources, the internal resources to really, you know, really educate the market? And we're like, it's not worth it. There are other lower hanging fruit on there. Would we go back to it? Probably, yeah, we could go back to it. But sometimes there's just alignment with what's out there. You know, what are people actually buying now? And then once you have your unique message as a brand, you could tap into that and use that to then fund an education campaign.
Yeah. Well, and also if you get your hero product going correctly and you're reaching this market that would likely buy other products, you know, within your portfolio, then you can use email marketing as a much lower cost way of educating that market rather than something like TikTok. And then eventually, once you scale enough and your hero product can kind of fund all of the other like education and testing. I like to talk about how once we get a winner, that winner helps fund the testing, but you have to have a winner before you can like test all these other cool, interesting ideas. And I really think that it takes a lot of control to also say, you know, I really like this product. I think it's going to work really well, but looking at the market, how much it's going to cost, it's not time for it yet. So let's put it back on the shelf. We'll keep selling it, but we're not going to put effort into it until we have the right resources. And that takes a lot of insight, a lot of control. Because I think sometimes too, founders are like, I believe in this product so much. If people just get it, they're going to go crazy for it. And they don't do the proper amount of research to confirm that before, or like understand how much education they actually have to do. So it's a really good example of that.
Yeah, and it's expensive. It's expensive to both from an emotional toll, you know, because if your emotions have the best, you know, view, you double down, the experiment doesn't work. It's very hard to step away from it objectively and say, okay, fair point. You know, I was wrong, because you were too positive, you know, on there. This business is all about survival, right? And you know, taking informed bets is very important, particularly if you're looking to replace a hero product. You know, for instance, it's very, very important to you know, just get informed decisions, you know, and know how to go to market. You know, really know how to go to market and have that nailed down. And the way people, you know, went to market 18 months ago is different to how they go to market today. So having that adaptability to how, you know, consumer trends are changing is important also.
Yeah. When you think about the types of businesses that you look to acquire at Octillion, I know sustainability is pretty big element to what you're looking for. Why did you choose sustainability, and are there other elements that you really prioritize when building out your portfolio?
So just to correct,
Mhm.
it's what we love sustainability.
Yeah.
We're all for sustainability for sure. But it's more the impact on your well-being.
Okay.
That's
Yes.
the
Mhm.
number one criteria for us.
Mhm.
If there's a net negative, we wouldn't even touch it. We would not have a conversation, even if we stand to gain a significant upside financially,
Yeah.
right? So it's really good for you, and it connects to my personal health journey.
Mhm.
I felt invincible at one point in my life, and I was just, I didn't take care of myself. I didn't realize what I was putting into my body, and health is truly wealth.
Mhm.
And so when we were going through deal flow 3 years ago or 3.5 years ago, and we're just going through deal upon deal upon deal upon deal. We think we went through 150 deals before we got our first deal. And this is just going through IMs,
Mhm.
investment memorandums, and going through P&L sometimes, going a bit
Mhm.
deeper, having
Mhm.
calls with founders. It became very clear that this is the space we wanted to play in. Good for you. Um,
Yeah.
there's also the the upside. Well, not the upside, but there's also it's also very important to focus, and then align with another organization should we want to, sort of offload, some of the assets
Mhm.
we have to another sort of health conscious or wellness focused group. Yeah, putting it in and just when you turn to work and that's okay. It's what you're doing is just not positive financially, but also positive at a humane level. Helping humanity.
Yeah.
I think it's good. We also we're also striving from a sustainability standpoint.
Mhm.
The packaging we use, we try to be as lean as possible. We're not all for fancy stuff
Mhm.
most of the time. We're conscious about that, but we think that if you're conscious as a human being at a health level, you naturally, because when you're conscious at a health level,
Mhm.
at a human level, you will find that you'd be mainly consuming like single ingredient,
Yeah.
products. And so that will naturally make you more sensitive to farming, to the environment, to sustainability. So I think it's fundamental that we almost go back from a nutrition standpoint. But yeah, I don't want to sound like a zealot here, but yeah, it's those are our fundamentals.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that it's important for firms like yours to have a very clear value system and take on very specific types of portfolios because that way everything you learn kind of crosses over to other companies. And I think it's important to believe in something. Have you ever felt a clash between this kind of rapid growth and maintaining the quality of product and this good for you wellness value?
So I've come to the realization that there's going to be a cap to the size of businesses we can
Yeah.
grow. I was having a conversation with ChatGPT, and it was like yesterday actually. It was like, what's the size of the health conscious market? And then it's like, well, it's 80%. I said, no, it doesn't really make sense. I like to
Yeah.
challenge it a bit. I'm
Yeah.
like, no, this doesn't make sense. This is, well, for this reference, okay, you're actually right. It might be 60. I said, no, 60 is too much. And it sort of came to a point where it's like it should be like less than 10%,
Hmm.
and this is of people who just are conscious of food, skincare products, and all of that
Yeah.
stuff. And so yes, we are, but if you compare it to like 2010, there is a change. So
Yeah.
it's a slow growth thing that's going to take decades
Hmm.
for us to realize that a lot of the choices we think we have when we go into supermarkets are they're either just not choice at all, or
Right.
there's just a net negative in the long term health of or well being, for us. And so, yeah, we just realized that there is a cap, and the cap is a cap, and
Yeah.
should we go higher up the chain, that we are seeing brands that are I've not seen, besides like Athletic Greens and just a handful of wellness brands, I haven't really seen any billion. I mean, skincare would be different, but unicorn level scale now. Because I haven't seen it doesn't mean it's not going to be
Right.
coming in droves, further down the line. But it would take time. It would take
Yeah.
time. Scaling is relative, right?
Yeah. Well, and I also think that when you think about the types of brands that you're working with, understanding that education is part of what you have to do. So you mentioned when you were figuring out what your next hero product was, you did research and you identified a place where you didn't have to do as much education, because you're like, mushroom coffee is something that people already know about. They're already searching about. Let's make that our hero product. But for other products, it's just understanding that that's going to be part of the growth strategy, is educating the public and creating that demand, which is challenging, but it's worth it for the value that that you're trying to put into the world. And I also do think that things are changing. There is a growing demand for this type of, we're learning so much more about microplastics and what's actually happening to the food that you're putting into your body. And I think the more the general public understands, that 10% will slowly grow over time, and you definitely want to be on the ground floor of it,
Absolutely. And you just made a very, very good point around microplastics in foods. That is the intersection of wellness and sustainability, pure. And it's in fish, seafood, it's in our water system. So yeah, it goes hand in hand, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you look kind of back on your whole journey, and with the brands that you've worked with in the past, and looking at e-commerce, what is the most valuable lesson that you learned kind of in the early days that still influences how you operate your business?
That's a very, very good question. Let me think. I think profitability, so from a very financial binary level, just ensuring you're profitable, is key. Contribution margin, very, very, very important, and true contribution margin, even more important. Just educating yourself at that level. If you're VC funded, that doesn't really matter, but it should be tracked. Because at some point, you'd be judged, you'd be valued off the back of that in a bit. But I think profitability is very important. Just to add to that answer, a brand as an organism. So the brands that have faltered from my experience have been brands that didn't stand for anything, didn't really. When you mention the brand to a customer of theirs, it's just nothing. There's just no mind share. So, just ensuring that your brand is an organism. It's a living, breathing, entity in the way it spurs, messaging out, and that links to this founder-led brands. I think it's very powerful to have founder-led brands. Because it then sort of puts that on steroids, really, where people are. There are downsides, obviously, of founder-led brands, but you could get a founder-led brand to hundreds of millions of dollars or pounds in valuation and revenue. So, if profitability and sustainable profitability is one of your things, and you don't want to sort of rely on and again, I'm speaking from a CPG standpoint, on an addictive product. When I mean addictive, sugar ridden and all that sort of stuff, then you need to sort of always remind your customer base as to why you're doing what you're doing on a regular basis. And when that comes from a human or a group of humans, it is powerful. It is really, really powerful. So, but you stay profitable while you're doing all that.
Yes. Bottom line, stay profitable. But we talk about authenticity a lot on the show, and there is something about it that it's really hard to quantify, but every brand that I know that has succeeded has some kind of authentic founder, or the authenticity is really baked into the brand, into their culture, because you're much less likely to sell out and do something that doesn't align with, your values. And I think a big part of authenticity is saying, this is what we do, and we never do this. So for Octillion, you guys are focused on wellness and good for you and improving human lifestyle. And we do not touch brands that don't fall in that line. Even if those brands are making millions and millions of dollars, it's just not what we do. And I think that's what makes Octillion more valuable overall, and will have much more longevity than those quick wins and that quick profit. But yeah, bringing it back down to profitability at the end of the day. Yeah. So what is next for Octillion? Are you working to acquire any new brands right now, or are you just working on growing the ones that you have? What's next? We're
looking forward to this. Is going to probably air in 2025, and if we get a brand under our belt this year, it'll be a big plus to us. We're having big conversations. Let me put it that way. In the background, I was in London a couple of weeks ago, and we're talking there's some partnerships underway. So bigger deals, bigger problems to solve, and with interest rates going down, they've gone down twice now. The base rate has gone down. We're hoping that there'll be more inflow of capital, which would make its way to us to deploy and essentially, do better for the world through commerce.
Yeah, amazing. I love that. Do you see any trends coming down the pipeline on an industry level? Do you see anything that you think is going to be taking off in the next couple of years?
Interesting you mentioned that, because I just put together 3 predictions. This is going to be going out on forms through a writer that I know. She just was asking people, like just folks around the industry, about e-commerce trends. My 3 trends are: prediction 1 is, with lower interest rates, it's going to drive up more e-commerce acquisitions, I think. But the frenzy of aggregators is not going to repeat itself. What I think is stronger holdcos are going to emerge. There's going to be more consolidations. E-commerce companies that look like e-commerce companies will be more holdcos. They'll have more access to capital, buy more businesses, and just make it more appealing for lower tier, private equity firms to essentially, buy them out. So I think there's going to be more activity with interest rates, going down. My second prediction was AI agents. I really think that, right now, I think for any savvy e-commerce operator, at least 50% of their customer service now is handled by AI. I think that's a given. AI has taken over customer support. Have you ever thought about an AI agent for an operations manager?
No, that feels scary.
It is scary, but I think there'll be essentially initially assistance to one, which would essentially accelerate their throughput. So I think AI agents are going to be really, really trained on aspects of roles, but there'll be assistance initially. I don't want to predict what will happen in 2026 and 2027, right. But savvy e-commerce businesses will have all of their managers or directors or key leaders have these agents, which should essentially accelerate or perfect their role, so reduce human error. And then I don't know, with TikTok Shop and TikTok, I think it's just going to strengthen in the US. First of all, there's going to be less political scrutiny on them. So far, so good with the headlines I've read. And yeah, we'll see. With that, I don't want to let me actually try and expand on that. So with the potential change in the US leadership, TikTok's future in America will hinge on how the administration addresses lingering concerns about ByteDance ownership and data security.
Yeah.
But it's been positive thus far. Over the campaign, it was positive.
Yeah.
So we'll see. I don't think they're going to leave the US anytime soon.
No, and it's even if they do, I think there will be some kind of. I don't see TikTok leaving the US, whether they're with ByteDance or with another company or it's a different version of TikTok. Something will fill that gap in some way. So hopefully TikTok sticks around because there's already been so much growth on it. But yeah, no, those are great predictions. I'm looking forward to seeing those things happen because they're all pretty positive, I would say.
Cheers. Are you active on TikTok? Does your agency work on TikTok or?
We do occasionally. The main challenge that we have on TikTok is that you need to produce so much content, and most of our clients aren't able to produce that much content at scale. And we have easier wins on Meta and Google, generally speaking. So TikTok is kind of like, once we have maxed out our Meta and our Google and all of our other platforms, then we can start testing on TikTok, because at that point we have a ton of content that we've used for Meta ads that we can just start using on TikTok. But it takes a lot of client participation to be posting as well, and like understanding that platform, because it is different than Meta and Instagram.
Yeah, I think one of the guests who came, they run Tej Kelly. He's like, his team produce about 500 pieces of content a month.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, it's just, you've got to do it.
Yeah.
they just churn it out. I'm like,
yeah.
But that is from the organization. It's internal.
Yes.
So it's not an agency, asking them to.
That's massive. No, I think that in the coming years, brands that invest in content creation, whether it's their internal or they're, partnering with content creators, those are the ones that are going to be the most successful with DTC brands. Just because it's an exhausting process, because it's so much content, but it has the most payoff. And you might produce 100 pieces of content, and if one of them works, it's worth it. If you're able to scale one piece of content out of the 100, you can really make a difference. But you have to kind of commit to the volume of it, unfortunately. Well, thank you so much for joining the show today, Kunle. Do you want to tell people where they can find you online?
So I'm most active on LinkedIn at the moment. Just search for Kunle Campbell on there. Octillion, Kunle at OctillionCapitalPartners.com or Kunle at 2xecommerce.com. I host a podcast. It's called the 2x e-commerce podcast, and there's a newsletter attached to it. Subscribe. Yeah. And thank you for having me, Connie.
Amazing. Yes, definitely go check out his podcast, subscribe to his newsletter. I think, Kunle, you've had so much great insight, and I'm sure people will be begging for more. And thank you to everyone at home or on the go for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please make sure to subscribe, share with a friend, and leave us a review. If there's anything you want to hear on an upcoming episode, just let us know. For more insights, follow us on LinkedIn or visit rightleftagency.com. And we'll be back next week with more stories of success, innovation, and marketing strategies to help you grow. Thank you so much.